Well, hey, welcome to the Bayview Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, as well, joined by...
Hey, Chris Emery. So good to have you back with us.
Yeah.
It's really exciting. Like, I know we're early on in the days, but it's still quickly becoming one of my favorite moments through the week of getting to sit down and do this. So good to be here. It's also kind of a monumental episode for us in that it is we have our first official guest.
Yeah. So joining us all the way from Hayes. Everyone called Hayes, Kansas.
I just have been fine.
Hayes, Kansas right. is Garrett Kahrs, itinerant speaker, father, husband, all the good things. But yeah, first guest, and you're kind of in town.
Yeah, the thing is like it's only going to get better from here.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to start too high.
You got to start very mediocre.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No,
thank you for having me on the podcast.
Who can baseline for us?
That's what I was thinking. Everybody goes back to the first podcast and be like, that's okay. So please don't write a review.
They've grown so much.
Yes, exactly. So, but it's an honor to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to be back. The guy at the airport was calling it Traverse City, and I was like, I just don't feel like that's right.
Yeah.
And so I almost went up and corrected him, but I'm from Kansas, so I don't feel like I have the authority, to do this. So, but it's good to be back. I was
here.
Kansas. I don't think we could say that on the podcast. Please beep that out. But no, it's good to be here. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah.
Love Bayview. Love I've been here before and just love what you guys are doing. And
Sweet.
Get to, obviously have a relationship with you, friends with you, and so get to kind of watch, from the sidelines a little bit.
Sure.
And it's just an honor to see what you guys are doing, and God's moving, and it's really cool to be here on the podcast. So thank you for the invitation to be on the podcast with you all.
No, we really appreciate it. I think, as we kind of dove into this, the conversation was always like, who can we have on? Who can be a guest? Who can join in? And like I said, our big goal is for this to be a resource to people.
Yeah.
And you have a lot to offer in that space of what we're doing. You've done a lot of ministry. And so I'm excited. I know Chris is excited to have you on and to really, hopefully have it on again in the future.
Sure.
Hopefully this is not just like a 3-episode thing we do.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that you would even join us is awesome.
Yeah.
So, well, hey, let's do this. What can you just kind of give us some background, like
Sure.
let the people know, like who is Garrett?
Yeah. So I grew up in a really small town in Nebraska, about 1,000. Actually, grew up in between a town of 50 and in between a town of 1,000. So I was a mile from the nearest person. So that's kind of the place that I grew up, in the middle of nowhere, really, in a little town, farming town. My dad and my grandpa, this 5th-generation farmer, so been farmers for over 100 years, and so grew up going to church. My mom was the worship leader of our church, and so I was telling some people earlier this morning that I did if there's any wise people who watch this or listen to this podcast, the transparencies, that you had to slide, and the worst was when you had to switch it, like if there wasn't enough. Like you had to switch it to another verse, and if you didn't get fast enough, the old ladies behind you let you know, So it's just like, I'm so sorry, we're not moving fast enough. So that's the church that I grew up in, before there was projectors and PowerPoint, and now there's just way more cooler things I have no idea about. So not a tech guy, but so I grew up in church. And at 4 years old, my mom led me to Christ during basically bedtime. She sat me down. Of course, we grew up in church, so I knew all those things, and she basically explained the gospel to me like this: like, hey, Jesus died for all of your sins, all the naughty things that you do, and He wants to be your boss. And that's how she explained lordship to me at 4 years old. And so I remember like that night saying, "Hey, I want Jesus to be my Savior, and I want Him to cover the penalty of my sins, and I want Jesus to be my boss." So I don't know if I got saved because I was rebelling from my mom's authority, or if it was because there's an authentic salvation moment.
Was that like an every night thing? Like
it wasn't every night actually. No. So
just heard that time together, or
she always. This is actually the first memory I have. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Like I can't remember anything before this moment. Like that was and I can remember that night. I got on the phone. We got the church directory out, and I called all the people like in our church directory and told them that I'd made that decision to follow Jesus. And so it's just a cool moment where my mom just felt like God saying, hey, why don't you share the gospel with your son and give him an opportunity. So she led me to Christ during bedtime, essentially.
How cool is that?
So it's a really cool moment for me. So I grew up in church, loved Jesus, was always the kid who had all the Jesus answers, all that, like all the stuff, read the Bible, all those things, and memorized all the verses. And then in 5th grade, I can remember this moment where we were in a service and small church, like less than 100 people, probably like 50 to 75 people on a weekend. And that's an average sized church in most places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a small town, I mean, that's a pretty big sized church. And so I can remember him basically giving an invitation saying like, hey, if there's anyone here in this church who feels called to ministry, I want you to come up and kneel at the pew. Now, I don't know if you know what a pew is, Andrew. You're a little younger than me, but
I've seen them.
Yeah, in pictures, church history
Those
books.
like old felt paintings. Like I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and for some reason, I was just like looking around. I'm like, that's me. Mm-hmm. And I can remember getting up, walking down the aisle, and kneeling at the pew, and not really knowing exactly what that meant. But for me, it just was like, I think that's me. I think I might be called to be a pastor. And so I walked up during 5th grade and kind of just was like, that's me, you know? So the only person who responded to the message, and if I've talked to my pastor, after like years and years after, and he said that he was walking by, he always prayed over the Sunday school classes every Sunday morning. So he would, after he welcome people in, he would go over and he'd pray over each and walk down the hall and kind of walk back and just pray over each individual room. And for the moments, I'm like, that's so cool. And he said that day he got to my room and it was like, pump the brakes, and he's like, he just felt like it was just a weird moment. He's like, hey, today's for Garrett. And he's like, what the heck? And he wasn't even planning to do the ministry calling, but he walked out and then he gave that invitation, and then I come walking down the aisle.
And you were the only one.
Only one.
I don't know is that pastor still alive?
Yeah, he is.
All right, so I don't know if he'll listen to this or not. He may be too old to know what podcasts are. I'm on that edge. But if he's listening, man, well done.
Yeah.
Because we're all preachers, right? So we've all done a ton of invitations. Put yourself in those shoes of like, you lay it on the line, you drop the bomb, you're ready for that invitation, and a 5-year-old comes forward.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of us have been like, well, that didn't end well? Like, we're dismissive of it, aren't we?
Right. Yeah.
And then to see you fast forward now all these years that, no, that was real.
Yeah.
That was real.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That's cool. That's just how awesome is that?
So cool story, and I've messaged him and we've communicated, and I just told him thank you, for just doing that, being a part of my story and just the impact that he gets to have through my life. And I'm not trying to be braggadocious, but I just told him, I was like, you are a part of my story, and you the fruit that I bear, you are a part of it. You are bearing that same fruit. And so just really cool story. I think a lot of pastors, they spend a lot of time doing ministry and they kind of wonder why, not necessarily wonder why, but am I doing anything that's going to matter? Sure. It has significance. And so that's why I messaged him like, hey, I just want to encourage you. Thank you. Yeah. Like, thank you for doing that.
Kudos to you for doing that. Like, you hit on the head. I remember the first church I was at, and when I was leaving, it was like, then I had a father walk up and was like, hey, thanks for everything you've done for my kids. Yeah. And I was like, I'd not talked to this dad in the 3 years I was there. And I was like, it hit me, like, I remember being like so convicted of like, I was super appreciative, but it was that reminder of like taking the time in the moment to thank those who've impacted, or like almost like that never withhold a blessing mentality of like, of just speaking that out to let others know like you're making a difference, or I see you, or I appreciate you. And like, so I was super appreciative of that moment, but it was just like, man, I'm not having this conversation. Yeah. Why'd he wait till I was leaving to say, I was going through that whole thing, but man, kudos to you for like taking that time to, I mean, just that might be the only time that pastor's heard something like, hey, you're making a difference.
Yeah.
And that's
cool.
And that's not just for, say that's to, don't just hype us pastors up. That's, I think that's in life.
Right. Yeah. And I've been a pastor for a long time, and I can remember those moments when people are like, and so for me, I was like, I know how much it matters to me when I hear that from someone else. Yeah. And so instead of me sitting back waiting for people to do that to me, and like kind of trying to wait. I'm like, I'm just going to wait to receive this. I've been trying to sow the seed of that in other people.
That's cool.
And so just going back and trying to do that. And there's been plenty of people who've done that for me in my life as I look back, just that matter. And so just really appreciative of that. And then, so that was 5th grade. And then after that, I can remember these moments. I went to school one day and told everybody I was going to be a pastor, which is not the greatest idea. And so I can remember this day, it's like, I'm going to be an astronaut. And, now he's an accountant, but it's fine. But, I remember this guy, he came to lunch one day and he's like, oh man, you're such a Christian. You're a loser, all this stuff. You're probably over there eating Messiah crackers and Jesus soup, and I'm just like, now it's funny, but to a 5th grader, it's just like devastating, it's like, oh my gosh. And I can remember this moment where I didn't yell this, but I just remember thinking like, if this is what following Jesus is like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And so 5th grader, I'm like, that's not really persecution. I mean, in the sense of like persecution,
right.
But for me, I was like, I do not want to do this. Like, I don't want to be ridiculed for the things that I feel like I'm supposed to do. And so it was that same year that I felt called to ministry that I actually started drinking.
Wow.
And so started rebelling from my faith, started trying to fit in the cool kids. I remember cussing, like that was a big thing for me. So
gotta use that right.
Yeah.
That right?
It's like you can't say it in front of the teachers, it's like, oh, I didn't know the rules. And just that was the start of my journey where I just rebelled from Jesus and just started this big rebellious lifestyle. And so 10 years of rebellion. 10 years of, and I still went to church because my mom made me go to church. And so 10 years of being in church. And when I went to college, I just stopped, and I was a statistic, right? We talk about if you've done any sort of study about young adults, I was that statistic. I was the person who went to church, but goes to college and rebels and walks away. And kind of try to make a long story short, because I know we have other stuff you want to talk about, but basically after 10 years, between my junior year and senior year of college, I found out my liver failed. Wow. And we went to doctor after doctor. My body was failing. I just had a lot of health issues. There's one moment where basically I had ulcers in my stomach, and they went all the way up my throat, all the way up into my mouth, to where I couldn't eat or drink. Like I think in 2 days I had like 8 ounces of Gatorade. So they had to take me to the ER, just because I couldn't keep fluids down. I couldn't drink, I couldn't eat, and they were very, concerned about me. And I realized, I was like, something is very wrong with me. And they kept telling me I was pulling back muscles, and I had all this like organ pain, but it's terrible. I can remember I went to a doctor and found out basically that my liver was failing. I was 21 and a half years old.
Wow.
And so he basically told me, he's like, hey, there's good news and bad news. I'm like, I hate that. Why do doctors say that? They train doctors to say that. I was like, well, whatever, just tell me. And he's like, your liver's failing, but there's good news. He's like, if you haven't done any permanent damage to your liver, it can actually restore itself, right? It can restore itself. He's like, but we don't know. We have no idea if you've done permanent damage to your liver. We have no idea. And so it was in that moment where I was like, well, this kind of makes a decision for me. You think I just turned to Jesus. It wasn't that. It was when I came back to school and I had to quit the lifestyle I was living, my life just crumbled to nothing. Like basically when I walked on campus, it was like, hey, that's Garrett Kahrs. Like people knew me. They wanted to come to like my parties. They wanted to be around me because of the life I was living.
Right.
And when that life got shoved out, when I couldn't live that way anymore, it was a life or death experience for me. Yeah. It was like I either stop doing what I'm doing or I could die. Or I'm on a liver transplant list, and 21-year-old alcoholics aren't really on the top of that list.
Yeah. Right.
And so basically my whole life crumbled, fell apart. Everybody, basically I felt like all my friends left me. They didn't care about me. And it was in that moment where I realized, I'm like, what has living this life actually gave me? When we read Luke 15, we're familiar with that passage, like when the younger brother came to his senses, that was me.
Yeah.
When I realized at the end of my road, it was like, living this life has left me with nothing.
Yeah.
And Jesus says like that way of life leads a path of destruction. I don't think he's just talking about eternity.
Right. No.
Like there are consequences for living a lifestyle away from God. And I think that at 21 years old, I met the consequences, and I'm thankful.
Wow.
Thankful that at 21 years old, I had to come face to face with the consequences of my sin and my rebellion from God's plan. And because I don't think I would have changed.
Yeah. Wow.
And so for me, I can remember the first day I walked into the church, I thought the place was just going to burn down. I thought the walls were going to come crumbling in, and I'd been to church my whole life, but I'm like, nobody. And I remember later on, this guy, he invited me to church probably close to 20 times, and he was the one who got me in the door. And so if you're a leader here and you think you've invited them too many times, I'm here to tell you to keep going. Because even if you're annoying, you don't have to be weird about it, but just be loving and kind, because the first person I messaged when I was like, I need to get back into church was him.
That's
because
cool.
I knew he loved me, because he invited me to church all the time. And it wasn't pressure. It wasn't conviction. It wasn't like, hey, you're going to hell, so you need to come to church. It was like, hey, man, we're giving away free food. Why don't you come to church?
You just knew what he was about.
I knew what he's about.
Right? You just trusted, like,
trusted who he is.
He's been a buddy. He's been a bro. And
can you imagine 20 times getting rejected by a dude?
Oh,
like I would have stopped. I don't even know if I go that far.
Well, and I mean, even what you said, you knew he loved you because he didn't stop. And it wasn't, you knew he loved you because he kept calling you out, or you knew he loved you because he told you all the things you're doing wrong. I mean, it was none of that. It's just like
he knew who I was.
He was persistent. He was consistent.
He knew.
He knew what you were about.
He knew who I was.
Like,
and despite all that, and so I remember walking into church and not really, I mean, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I just feel so much love, but I just was there, and I can remember just feeling so convicted of my sin. And the message was about love. And it wasn't even about that, but I just was like, I can't keep living this way.
Wow.
And later on, they told me, they're like, the pastor, I met up with the pastor for a while, and he loved and cared about me, was like, hey, you need to live for Jesus and help me get on the right path. But he'd tell me later on that, like, when I walked in, somebody ran up to him and was like, do you know who that is? Do you know who just walked in these doors? He's like, what the heck? And he didn't know me from Adam, and he's like, that's the biggest partier on Fort Hays State campus. It's like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to love him.
Wow.
I wonder what his
I don't
was. Like,
no.
what are you going to do?
Like shove him out?
Kick him out? Like, ushers, get him. Go.
Yeah, but just what a loving response, and so that's for me, that's the culture that I grew up in. Like, when I recommitted my faith, was this loving, kind, just very respectful. Like, we understand your past, but God has a plan for you, and He can redeem you. And so, it was probably 3 months later, and I was up on the platform sharing my testimony, and I just felt at home on the stage. Like, this is home for me, which is weird. I was always good at public speaking, like just naturally good at, like, at college, they're like, wow, you're good at this. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to be a farmer, like, I'm going to go home and farm. And then probably 6 months later, I can remember, this is a weird moment, but I had this dream that I was preaching a message, and I woke up and I wrote down the message, and that was the first message I ever preached. And so I got up and preached this message and invited all my fraternity brothers. So I was in a fraternity in college, and they all showed up in suits.
No way.
And I'm preaching in shorts,
that's awesome.
Like, they're just full on suits, and it's college ministry, to chillest of the chill, and they show up in suits. I'm like, heck yes,
Let's go.
And so I preached this message about belonging. And that was what I was dealing with. I felt like all my friends left, and God's been giving me this new family. And so I preached this message on belonging and some salvation stuff, and told more of my testimony, and got done. And everybody stood up and gave a standing ovation. And it was at that moment where I was just like, I think this is what God made me to do. And so that was kind of the start. And then we started into, so I was volunteering, but then started working for the college ministry that next fall. So had a year of leadership under my belt, and then I went to the guy who was leading the ministry, and I was like, hey, I'm going to work for you.
Yeah.
And he's like, I can't pay you. I'm like, no, I want to work for you. Like, I want to do college ministry. This is what I feel called to, and I'll do whatever it takes so that I can do this. And so that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now, recently just stepped down from my position, felt like God was asking me to step away from college ministry after 10 years. And so now we're going to be doing some nonprofit work and some itinerant work as well. So
Very cool.
yeah, that's kind of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, that's a big deal, man. That's so many incredible, not just Garrett Kahrs stories, but Garrett gospel aligning stories, like living out the prodigal son story personally, which I've always felt is just like one of the most beautiful examples of just the gospel story anyway. But just an amazing the way God's had his hand on your life from early on, even in those times where you wandered away. You know.
And I remember I called my pastor who was really overseeing me during that time. And so he's my pastor, my home church pastor now, but he was my youth group leader. And I called him after I recommitted my faith, and I thanked him too, because I told him, I was like, when I wasn't listening in the back, I was listening.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're always listening.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you formed a foundation in me that I'm building upon right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, without me being forced to go to church, I would have never had this foundation. We had kids coming to Christ all the time who didn't have a foundation, and I shot up in leadership really quick, really fast because of the theological foundation that I had.
Yeah.
And so I just told him, I was like, same thing, the seeds you planted in me, even when it was hard soil, they're coming to fruition. I was like, I have seeds in my heart that you planted 10 years ago that are coming to fruition, and I just want to say thank you.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
So just a cool story, and I'm just thankful. Honestly, I'm just thankful that God redeemed my life. He gave me that grace to for me to be able to fulfill my life. And college ministry was a perfect thing for me. I mean, I recommitted my life to Christ in college, and I have kids that tell me all the time, they're like, you don't understand what I'm going through. I'm like, oh, I understand you. I understand you, bro. I understand you, girl. I understand the college is a very tough thing.
Yeah.
But the one thing that frustrates me, I think, about is like we hear about how the world's going to hell in a handbasket all the time, but we don't hear the stories of God's good news. Like, we have college students coming to Christ all the time.
Yeah.
And we have people who are getting saved all the time, people who are coming out of addictions all the time. And so for me, I've actually, when I preach a lot of times at older churches, I'd start with telling stories of young adults coming to faith, because for some reason, as Christians, we've just become like, oh, the world's going to hell and there's nothing good, and we don't celebrate the things that God is doing. And it's just like, God's not surprised. Like, this is going on, and what a mission we have. And guess what? God still loves people. He's still in the saving business. He's still saving people.
Absolutely.
And I was like, what if we stopped hating the world and we actually loved them?
Yeah.
That's the message right there. And it is, because we talk about this often here, actually, that there is this temptation to go into what I read somewhere. Somebody called it the Chicken Little syndrome.
Yeah.
And that's happening in church, where the sky is falling. So often, much of the church's reaction is, so let's batten down the hatches, let's close the doors, let's hunker down until Jesus comes back, which is basically saying, like, all right, we're done. We've done all we can, and we can't do any more, and therefore God can't do any more. And it's like, wait a second, the mission of the church doesn't stop. It doesn't stop, because Jesus doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an opportunity now more than ever. And I love that you're sharing those stories, and we all probably need to do a much better job of that, of celebrating what God is doing.
Right.
Yeah.
There's plenty. We know the world's jacked up. We know the world's not right. It's never been right.
Well, and I think one of the guys that I've been listening to and went to a training of his out on the West Coast, he said that to the amount of depravity we expose ourselves, we actually have to expose ourselves to more beauty than that.
Wow. Yeah.
That's good.
And so when we think, I'm like, if people are watching the news, if people are watching social media, we are getting exposed to a vast amount of depravity. And if we as leaders aren't exposing ourselves to the beauty that is around us, whether it's beautiful stories or beauty in creation or whatever it is, we actually have to expose our hearts and our souls to beauty, because I think we'll become jaded, and it's easily become that. And so we just have to be careful. It's like, guard your hearts. Well, we also have to put in good things too.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
So I think that's something that we need to be doing as well.
It's really interesting because I had a professor in college who would always talk about Jesus, and he would use language like beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and he would speak like in an artistic way about Jesus, and it's like just become like a natural thing to say that, the beauty of Jesus, like because like to expose yourself to something beautiful to help. I don't know. You need light to get out of the darkness,
Yes,
and that's what
right.
it is. And so,
Yeah.
man, I love that.
Yeah, it's like when you golf, you know, it's like, hey, don't hit it into the trees, don't hit it into the trees, don't hit it into, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to hit into the trees. Like, what we give power to what we focus on.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think we have to be pretty cautious just about what we're ingesting, what we're doing. And so as a leader, I've been trying to continue to still tell stories of Jesus's redemption because I think if people hear that, and a lot of times what I love to do is like, I don't even try to tell stories of where I led people to Christ. I'm like, hey, there's this girl in our ministry who led one of her art friends to Christ, and she started discipling her. And now there's this little group in the art department, which if you've been into an art department on the university, it's like, it's not necessarily a very sanctified place. And so it's like now they're starting to reach people in this department where nobody would want to go. Wow. And so the thing is like, I think when we tell stories of like, hey, I led this person to Christ or whatever, they're like, oh, that guy's a professional. He can do it. Exactly. But when we actually start celebrating people who, in the eyes of others, they're not ordinary. They're extraordinary. I don't want to put people down, but in other people's eyes, they're just like them. They're the average Joe. Yep. If they can do it, then I can do it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think sometimes as preachers and leaders, we have to be cautious about being the hero of our own story.
Oh, hands down.
You know, and so, because I've been there, I've done that, and so I've been trying to tell other people's stories in a way that honors them, but then it just gives that courage to other people. Yeah. And so I can remember when she sat down with this girl to share the gospel. I don't know if I've ever prayed harder for somebody's salvation, because this was the first person who was a non-paid staff to lead somebody to Christ in our ministry. Wow. Right? Because we were so event driven. Yeah. We were so like, hey, come bring your friend to church so that they can hear the gospel, so that they can be saved, rather than equipping our people with the gospel to go out into the world and to help people lead them to Jesus. And so we had this really big mind shift kind of change, and I was convicted by the way I was leading, and I was like, we have to send people out, not try to bring people in. And when they get saved, then we'll bring them into the family of God and love them and care for them. And so that was the first time, and I can remember she called me and she's like, she gave her life to Christ and we're celebrating, and I'm just telling the story over and over and over and over again, because in everybody's mind, oh, that's just this girl. She's in college like me. I can do this. Yeah. And so what we saw at Encounter was this huge explosion of faith and evangelism. People were like, if she can share the gospel with her friend, I can share the gospel with my friend. And so we had this huge explosion of evangelism that was happening, huge explosion of discipleship that was happening, because we started to celebrate the stories of other people that were just ordinary people. And I'm ordinary. I'm as mediocre as it gets. Yeah. You know, but when you have this title, like you're a pastor or whatever, all of a sudden you become this professional person, and people just don't look at you the same way. And so I always try to take myself off the pedestal as much as I can, just so that people look at me differently. And I'm just average person, just average Joe.
Well, we all are, and that's something we talked about even already on this podcast, is that there's a huge list of things that make us completely unqualified to lead a podcast, you know, because we're not experts at anything other than I'm an expert at needing more Jesus, and I'm an expert at messing things up, those kind of things. So none of us are that. You know, Jesus is the only hero. Yeah. But celebrating the ordinary people is also celebrating the mission of how this is always supposed to be. Right. That if we as the Big C Church continue to leave it up to just the professionals, we're done. Right. We're done, because there's only so many conversations I can have in a week. You can have in a week. There's only so many people I know. Yeah. And I don't live where you live. I don't work where you work. I don't go to school where you go to school. You have this circle of influence of people that God has put in your life. Right. There's a calling on your life. You've got a responsibility to love them and get them to Jesus. Love them to Jesus. Love them to Jesus. And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah. I don't want to ruin your Acts series, but when Peter and John are in front of the Sanhedrin, what do they say about Peter and John?
They're just
ordinary men, but they recognized they'd been with Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, that was like a calling card for our ministry. It's like, hey, we're just ordinary people. There's nothing special about us. We have a special gift to offer people.
And now we do have to change our entire series. Now that just ruined it. You gave kind of the secret ending of it all. Way to go. Thank you, Garrett.
Sorry, everybody.
So it's been real. We appreciate you being with us today.
So I mean, it's one of those things. And I think youth ministry is vital for churches. I think young adult ministry is vital for churches. And I do, if you can get a high schooler and middle schoolers, I'm not sure about them, but
their parents aren't sure about them.
For sure. But if you do middle school camp, like, bless your heart. You know what I mean? Like, bless your heart. That just is so impressive.
It's a smelly place.
Smelly, just stinky. Yeah, just it is what it is. That's why I do young adult ministry.
I was going to say, is it wrong that I will never take a middle school speaking engagement? Is that wrong for me to say?
No, I don't. I mean,
I don't take those anymore.
Jesus. I'm not. You can take that up with Jesus. I
turn those down all the time. Yeah. So,
but yeah, I think it's vital, and I'm just thankful for churches and people who that's their passion.
Yeah.
And so for me, I've seen. Over 10 years, we've sent so many people out of our ministry who have continued to follow Jesus, who are in love with Jesus, who are leading churches, who are leading other ministries, who are leading nonprofits, and they have fallen in love with Jesus, and they're out there changing the world. And there's just, I don't know if there's any greater investment than people call them the future leaders of the church, but they are the church.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to ask you real quick then, because what you said is so awesome that we need to be hearing the good stories, the God stories.
Yeah.
Give us, you are deeply ingrained in the young adult culture and in that ministry. And it's not even anymore with young adults. It's not a matter of saying they're the future leaders. They're the current leaders that are taking over.
Yeah.
They're now. It's not 10 years. They're the here and now. Give us maybe a quick, kind of your perspective of what are the things that we should be excited about going on with this current generation that we call young adults, which is anywhere from 18 to 29 to that weird 45-year-old that thinks he's still a young adult.
You talking about yourself again?
No, I know I'm not a young adult. I
got your boys to laugh on that one, dude. That was good.
All right, my sons are no longer allowed in the studio when I'm recording. That's not okay. Anyway, guy, give us a few highlights. I know we have more things to do. What are things we should be excited about?
Sure. I think that if you look at young adults, even when they're not Christians, they're very passionate about making a difference in the world. Right? And so for me, we're not trying to change that. We're trying to redeem it. Right? So they're trying to make a difference. They're trying to make a difference. They have something ingrained in their heart and in their life. We all know what that is, right? And they're so passionate, and all we're doing is saying, "Yep, guess what? We've been doing that for 2,000 years." And the impact we have is not only going to change this side of eternity, but it will change the other side of eternity. So if you really want to make a lasting impact, one that will live beyond your life, this is the calling. This is the mission. This is what we're called to do. Good. And so I think for me, one of the things is, and even into Gen Z, I think you're seeing this too. They are so passionate about whatever their cause is, right? Whatever their cause is, they're going to do it wholeheartedly. And so for me, it's like, hey, I'm not trying to say, hey, don't do this. It's like, no, I'm just trying to redeem your passion and trying to give you a vision for what God's called you to do. And I'm telling you, if you can flip the switch and saying like, hey, there's a bigger impact you can make, holy cow, dude. Like, you will see people on fire for Jesus that will love lost people like nobody else does. And that's the other thing. I think that they love people way better than any other generation has. They have a love and a vision for other people that, and they can be judgmental like we all can, but I think for me, they just have this deep love for humanity in a lot of ways. And so I for me, those are kind of the big things. I think the passion thing, that's a huge inroad.
I love that you said that. I've never thought of it that way, that we redeem their passions. I think I've been guilty. My generation has been very guilty of, because maybe their passions are misplaced, that we work hard to douse their passions with the water on it. Like, And that whole idea, I love that. I had never thought of it in that perspective before, because we're all cause driven. I think that's that God-given drive in us. We're cause driven. Yeah. It's just sometimes it's misplaced, and so we can get cause driven over an initiative, or we can listen to a Sarah McLachlan song and adopt a puppy or something like that. But if we can redeem it, it's God-given, and that's anything that's redeemed in our lives, right? We're redeemed for the purpose of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's super powerful.
How do you see the church then, or maybe someone older, like how do they come alongside then and support that redemption of their passion and whatnot?
Yeah, I think that for me at least, we need wisdom. Like we need passion. We can take our passion and misplace it. We can kind of I think I've done a lot of things. I'm just like, yeah, rah, rah, like cheering on. And it was like, hey, if you would have given me just a little wisdom where I would have been able to kind of solely focus in on that one thing rather than just being passionate about 12 things. That like Foster Christie, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him or not. He's a part of Forge for a long time, and he's my mentor. And he always tells me, he's like, Garrett, listen, you be about what Jesus wants you to be about. He goes, don't worry about the rest.
Nice.
And, so for me, it's the same thing with that passion is like, hey, what has God called you to do?
Mm-hmm.
Not all of us. We're all, and so, sorry, I think I just slapped him with the camera. But
Foster can take it.
Yeah.
Foster can take it.
Yeah.
That's good.
But so the thing is I think that's where that wisdom and passion come together, where I think what happens when that happens is a lot of times the wisdom we get is like, hey, stop being as passionate about that. Kind of slow your roll rather than what should happen. I think is as the generations intermingle, the younger people infuse passion to older people. They infuse wisdom, and then the church becomes a church, and we do what we're actually supposed to do.
Yeah, let's go
in a wise way.
Well, even think about the words that Jesus used. In that light, the profoundness of what Jesus used in calling the first disciples. He didn't say, hey, like, you've been fishing your whole life. Hey, let's put this fishing gig aside, you silly fishermen. It's time to do church. Yeah. No, he redeemed their passion. Yeah. You get to fish.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that passion, but now you can go fish for men.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much there for us as the church to embrace that Andrew and I talk a lot about this, what are we doing wrong? What have we been getting wrong? Because we've been doing it wrong in a lot of ways for a long time. I think that's a big one. I really like the way that's huge.
Yeah, that's so good.
So
good. Well, can you share maybe just some philosophy of you, or maybe even just like there's some things you wanted to kind of touch on that for you are passion areas of yourself and that have maybe motivated you in the way that you've followed Jesus, that you encourage others to follow Jesus. Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So a couple of things I was just praying about, like, oh God, what do you want me to say? I don't have anything good to say, on this podcast. So I wanted to be, like professional and try to put something together for you guys. So, anyways, there's two things I really want to share. The one thing is I think as emerging leaders, as older leaders, there's this passage in Matthew chapter 9 that we're all very familiar with. Right? There's this passage in Matthew 9, and Jesus basically, he's going like through the towns and villages, it says, and he's preaching the good news of the gospel. He healed every disease and sickness. And if you're listening and you want to get out your Bible, I guess I could give the reference like a good preacher, but it's Matthew 9, verse 35. And then it says in verse 36, I think that this is where I really want to camp out. It says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and I think a lot of times, and the circles that we run in, this is the key verse, right? And I think a lot of it, and it's beautiful, it is great. I think a lot of us, we focus in on the shortage of laborers. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think even when I was leading young adults, I told people, I was like, the harvest is ripe for the harvest. For like the fruit is ready for harvest. There are people right now who are ready to give their life to Christ. And God is calling you to share the message, right? We need to be laborers. We need to be willing to go out and do those things. But I actually think we need to go back to verse 36. What happened that led Jesus to say we need more laborers? Mm-hmm. He's preaching. Can you imagine the amount of energy it took for him to preach, to heal every disease and sickness? He's going from town to town, and he's just inundated by the lostness of people.
Yeah.
Right? It says when he saw the crowds, he was what? He had compassion. Jesus' mission is led out by compassion.
100%.
And I think so many times as leaders, if we've been in the church for too long, I hate to say that, but I think we lose sight of this verse.
Yeah.
We need more workers. We need more volunteers. We need, and we lose sight of the reason why Jesus prayed for more laborers is because they're people who are harassed and helpless. They don't have a shepherd. And he had compassion on them. And so for me, I call this Matthew 9 moment. Because I think that we as leaders, we need to have a Matthew 9 moment.
Yeah, 100%.
I remember we got done with the service on a Sunday, and I go to Walmart on after church to get groceries for the week, and so almost everybody.
Test of your faith. Right
yes. No.
Go.
Yeah. So I can remember, I walked into Walmart, and it was the weirdest thing. I just look up, and it is packed, just packed full of people. And I look around, and I just start crying. It's because they're cutting onions right next to me. I'm fairly sure. Right? They're just chopping them up, giving out samples of onions. And really? I just started crying. I'm pretty sure that's how it happened.
There's an onion for you. Welcome to Walmart.
And I literally started bawling because I realized that all these people are unchurched. That these people don't have faith. And I was celebrating. We had a full church, great service, all this stuff. I'm all happy, and I walk into Walmart, and I saw the crowds, and I realized that they were harassed and helpless because they didn't have a shepherd. And for me, I can remember in that moment coming back to this passage and realizing that in Walmart, I had a Matthew 9 moment.
Yeah, you did.
And I think there are times when I come back to that moment to remind myself of why I do what I do. Because I think a lot of times we get caught up in looking for more laborers and we lose sight of the people who are lost.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're hitting on something that has been a missing link for some time. It's a key to who Jesus is throughout his ministry. It is that word compassion.
Yeah.
I think as the church and as followers, sometimes we're very familiar with pity, because I see people hurting, lost, whatever, and I feel bad.
Yeah.
But I don't do anything with it. Well, that's pity.
Yeah.
I think as the church, we're good at programmed compassion. Meaning, like, yes, I'll go serve at that homeless shelter at 5:00 next Thursday. I can fit some compassion in,
Right.
But that's not Jesus' compassion. Jesus' compassion is a change of your view every day, all day, and it hits you without warning.
Yeah,
and you are overwhelmed. And so I've always looked at it this way: pity is passive, compassion moves us.
Yeah,
we read those words when Jesus showed up at Lazarus' tomb.
Yeah.
Jesus knew the end of that story.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus knew what was getting ready to happen. I mean, in the back of his mind, he's like, this is going to blow them away. Like, this is going to be awesome. Like, wait till they see Lazarus come bebopping out. But then we also read that Jesus wept. And I ask that question frequently of people, like, why do you think he cried? Well, he cried because his compassion was so overwhelming, watching the hurt of those he loved.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what your Matthew 9 moments are referring to. And it fast forwards over to Matthew 25, where that's what he's talking about between the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
The sheep, like, hey, you're blessed because you couldn't go a day in your life without being moved to respond, to love, to meet needs, to do everything you could.
Yeah.
And you didn't even know you were doing it. It's because it's who you are.
Yeah.
And compassion is a dangerous prayer.
Yeah.
Because it'll wreck you.
Yeah.
It'll interrupt your day every day.
Yeah. So that's what I would just, for me, I didn't know I needed a Matthew 9 moment.
Yeah.
And that, for me, it was just like, this is why I do what I do. And I try to remind myself of that. And so I would say that I just be praying for people to have more. I'm praying for more. I prayed for more Matthew 9 moments than I prayed for laborers.
I think the laborship is a byproduct.
No,
right?
It is. Yeah. And that's what I mean.
Yeah.
If you have a Matthew 9 moment, there's nothing else you can do but become a laborer.
Yeah.
I agree.
So
I love that.
for me, I'd say, and the thing is, like, you can't force it.
Yep.
Like, it's not something that you can force or try to, like, oh, I need this moment. It's just like, for me, it's just one of those things, like, man, you see Jesus' response, and he prays for more laborers, and we get this invitation into that, which is just so cool.
Yeah.
And so as a leader, as a pastor, as someone who is trying to maybe even get into ministry or whatever, remember what this is about. Remember what we're doing.
Yep.
And remember who Jesus is. And we're trying to become more like him. And so when we encounter people who are lost, we have compassion. Like, this is what and we're sinful humans. We stink sometimes, and so it's not like it's an ever increasing thing where we continue to have compassion on people. So,
and the beauty of this is it's not just for the pastor. Like, this is anyone who's a believer. Like, to have your eyes be
it's
opened.
Just labor, a worker. Like, you don't. There's nothing special about this. It's just ordinary people who are willing to get into the messiness of other people's lives.
So good.
And so, and that's what, like, for me as a leader, like, you look at Ephesians chapter 4, it says that the pastor, the shepherd, the prophet, they're all supposed to do what? Equip the saints for the work of ministry.
Yeah.
So for me as a leader, that's actually one of my, like, foundational verses, is like, my job is one, yes, we do ministry, but my job is actually to equip people for the works of ministry. And so that when they're in the dentist's office, when they're in the chiropractic office, when they're taking their kids to church, or they're taking their kids to daycare, or they doing whatever, there's going to be moments where they're led to compassion, and Jesus will use them to do ministry.
So true.
And that's where the rubber meets the road. You know, there are millions of people who'll never set foot in a church, but they can encounter Jesus through workers, through the laborers. And I think if we can get this right as a church, that's when we'll start to see, like, we started having people who I can remember this moment where we had this leader who came up to me and she's like, hey, I really want to join the leadership team here at Encounter. And I was like, great, let's do it. I was like, hey, we have this discipleship process. We have a book. We have all this stuff. And she's like, oh, I'm almost done with that. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah. She's like, I know this is my first time to Encounter, but so-and-so has been discipling me for 8 weeks, and I realized I needed community. And I'm like, yes. Because I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. There are people who will never set foot inside of the church until they know they need the family of God. Yeah. But they're ordinary people who are working on behalf of those people, and so we shared that story a lot, because I was like, this is what it's about. Like, there are people that they whatever reason, there's hurdles to come into church or whatever, but somebody loved them, cared about them, discipled them. Now they know that they need the community, they need the body, and so they're walking in the doors.
So good.
That is awesome, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So, and then the other thing I wanted to share, I think a lot of times, just as Christians, when it comes to obedience, we tend to label obedience, right? We tend to kind of label it, whether we think it's going to be big, and mostly the outcome, right? It's like, hey, if I do this, Jesus, is this going to be a big thing or whatever? And I did that for a lot of years in my life. Like, hey, Jesus, if I go to do this speaking event, what's going to happen? Is it going to be a big thing? Is it going to be a great thing? And I think there's this prevalence to kind of talk about the big things, the big deals, all this stuff. And so I actually started working on this message that I called Simple Obedience, right? It was like, hey, we're going to do the small things for Jesus. We don't need to necessarily do the big things for God. Like, we can, and when God asks us, we'll do it. But let's focus on the small things for Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I can remember, and I'm like writing this message, working on, I'm like, oh, this is going to wreck everybody, blah, blah, blah. And I can remember I sat down to start kind of continue on this message, and I became very convicted. And I can remember, like as I was praying, thinking through it, I had this thought that popped in my head, that I was basically going to swing the pendulum of obedience. We're going to talk about big things. Well, now we're only going to talk about little things. And I can remember being convicted, like, Garrett, you are labeling obedience. And basically got convicted that I was actually trying to be God. It's like, well, if I do this, then this thing's going to happen. It's going to be a big deal. I'm a big deal. Or if I do this little thing, it's okay because Jesus sees me. And what I realized is I was labeling obedience, and it's actually God who determines the outcome, and it's my job to say yes to him. And so there's I won't read the passages, but in Luke 5 and Mark 12, there's two little stories I want to talk about. And in Mark chapter 12, there's this widow, right, who's very poor. And it said that everybody was going into the synagogue, and Jesus kind of sits back and just watches, right, just kind of sits there and watches. So if you want to watch the offering boxes, I think it's biblical for you to do that now. Please don't do that. I won't come back. But anyways, it says that, everybody's giving their money. And back then, it actually, when you gave money, it's almost like not a microphone, but it literally would like splash and make a big noise. So when people put money in there, it would like kind of like fireworks. It's not that loud, but just really loud. And so people knew how much people were giving, right? And so he's watching all these people give money, and this widow comes in and puts in like one coin, right? Puts in just a very little bit of money, and Jesus stops the show. He goes, "You guys notice it? Did you see that? You see that great act of faith?" He goes, "That widow just put in everything she had." And I wonder how many times that widow felt overlooked and undervalued, that she felt like she wasn't doing enough. She felt unseen, unnoticed, and the Savior of the universe noticed her, and we're reading about her thousands of years later.
Yeah.
Because she was willing to give everything she had when no one was watching. And I wonder if we're willing to do the same.
Yeah.
How many times did she maybe stutter step outside, talking herself out of, I shouldn't go in. This isn't enough to matter.
It's not enough. I'm not going to make a difference. All these people putting all this money in, and she's giving everything she has.
Yeah.
And Jesus stops the show and goes, "That's a great act of faith."
So
something that we would never celebrate her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the church, we would never, "Hey, look at all of it. Thank you so much." We would never celebrate that woman. But Jesus stops the show and was like, "This woman is worthy of my time. I see you." And I want to say to the people who are listening to this, like, if you feel unseen, unheard, that you're not doing enough, that you're not good enough, Jesus sees you and he recognizes your faith.
Yeah, let's go. So
Amen.
Good.
And he notices what you're doing. And you've given everything. You've given everything you have.
Yeah.
And no one's noticing, but God knows what you've given.
Yeah.
That's unlabeled obedience.
Mm-hmm.
And in Luke chapter 5, it's actually the invitation of Peter to discipleship with Jesus. And after a long day, they fished at night because it was so hot during the day. The fish would go down deep. They didn't have very big nets back then. So at night, they'd fish all night when the fish would start to come up in the water. And so it says that basically Jesus showed up. He's preaching. He noticed these fishermen coming in. And you remember the story? He's like, "Hey, Peter, put out into the deep." And remember what he says? He says, "Lord, we've been fishing all night." We've been fishing all night, dude. You have no idea what you're talking about. It's probably close to the middle of the day. They're cleaning their nets. They're getting ready.
Yep.
Like, they're going to go to bed. They're getting ready for bed. Like older men, like you work a hard day, you're ready for bed.
Yep.
And what does Peter say? "But because you say so, Lord will do it." And so for me, I've been trying to learn how to have a because you said so faith.
Awesome.
It's good.
And so that's what, for me at least, I think as leaders, that we're willing to do whatever, whenever, and to whoever.
Yeah.
And it's Jesus, right? And I think a lot of times when it comes to obedience, and we can end here, when it comes to obedience, we ask the wrong question. We ask, is this worth it? Is it worth my time? Is it worth my finances? Is it worth everything? Whatever. Is it worth it? I think it's the wrong question. The question we should be asking, is Jesus worthy?
Yeah.
And we already know the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
So good.
That is, man. That's so good. That's so good. Just that that obedience labeling, and just recognizing that it's not about the results of our obedience. So that's where we label them.
Yeah.
We label it based on the results. Jesus isn't asking anything about the results or about the outcome. He's, like you said, he's directing that. The best we can offer is our obedience. That's our best.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love it.
So
I love
good.
it, man.
There it is.
It is.
Start out with a bang.
Yeah. Well, dude, we are so appreciative of you coming to spend time with us.
You.
Thank you for sharing your heart and just what you had for us today. I got a ton of things rolling around in my head. I mean, I'll just be totally honest with you. I got a ton of that I'm going to rip off and preach on Sunday.
That's fine. Dwight preached that because you said so message at Deep
did
Camp.
He? Nice.
Yeah, I'm
did he give you credit?
Dude, no.
All right, Dwight. I don't know if you listen to this or not, but we're calling you out. You got credit where credit's due.
He did a much better job than I'd ever do with it.
Yeah,
sure.
Because he's the master.
Yeah,
he's Master Yoda. Man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Praying for you. Thankful for the way you guys do ministry and how you're leading here, because it matters.
People can find you on social media, stuff like that.
Yep. Just whatever they can find me. Garrett Kahrs, GarrettKahrs, the weirdest last name, but love to connect with you. Have questions, you're going through it. Like this is why I love people. I love questions. I love like wrestling with people. Right now we're wrestling with one young adult who's deconstructing his faith.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me last week, he's like, you're the only person who'll listen to me. And he's like, because everybody thinks I'm a heretic.
Yeah.
And he goes, but you're the only person who'll listen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here, man, I'm here for you.
Just
and I might not agree with that thought, but I love you.
So good.
Listening is not agreeing. Listening is loving.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love it, dude.
Yeah. So love to connect with you guys if I can.
Well, and like Andrew said earlier on, hopefully this is the first of more time where anytime you're in the area, man, we'd love to have you as a guest, hear more about what God is doing, and have you drop some more bombs on us, man, because it was huge. I love it. So
awesome.
Hey, everybody, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for listening. Just continue to tune back. We'll be here with you each and every week. You can find us on all the different podcast platforms, and look forward to see you next time around. We're out.